People think Project Gateway was just a government curiosity, a weird Cold War side quest where a few psychics stared at paper and tried to see secret bunkers. That's the sanitized version. The version that keeps you calm, keeps you working, keeps you paying attention to the wrong threats. Because if you stitch together the whispers, the declassified scraps, the sudden program name changes, the scientists who quietly vanish into private sector consulting, and the strange cultural glitches that began showing up like hairline cracks in reality, you get a different story. A story where remote viewing didn't just look into distant rooms. It looked through the wall of the world, and something looked back. What follows is the complete timeline as insiders tell it, from the earliest groundwork to the future chapters we're already being steered toward. If it sounds unbelievable, remember, the most effective secret isn't one nobody talks about. It's one everybody jokes about. 1933, the early blueprint. Occult societies, intelligence circles, and industrial money cross paths more often than history books admit. European mysticism meets American logistics. The idea is simple. Consciousness isn't just inside the skull. It's a tuning fork. And if you can tune it, you can aim it. 1943, the first silent breach. Reports circulate inside naval research circles of experiments with intense electromagnetic fields and altered perception. The public gets legends and myths. Inside, the concern is different. Certain field conditions produce presence effects. People feel watched by something that isn't there. The files don't call it paranormal. They call it non-local attention. 1947, the modern cover story begins. Unidentified craft reports explode into the public sphere. Official explanations fracture into contradictions that never quite resolve. Behind the scenes, the goal becomes twofold. Control the narrative of what's in the sky, and quietly explore what's behind the mind. Because the craft aren't the whole story. The craft might be the bait. 1951, the first controlled trauma protocols. Early mind alteration research expands under national security banners. The working theory is brutal and straightforward. Trauma breaks the mind's normal filters. In the broken space, signal comes through. Psychics aren't born, they're carved. The ethical debates are short-lived, because the Cold War makes every line look negotiable. 1953, MKULTRA isn't just about drugs. It's about thresholds.
LSD, sensory deprivation, binaural audio, hypnosis, sleep disruption, ritualized suggestion.
Not to create obedient citizens, to create repeatable doorway states. Some subjects describe the same thing without being prompted. A pressure in the room, an intelligence that feels ancient, and a hunger that feels mathematical. 1958, the energy language appears. Analysts begin using unusual terms in reports: drain, fatigue spike, emotional harvesting. They don't write demons. They write predatory interaction. Certain sessions correlate with depression, insomnia, sudden rage, compulsions, and recurring nightmares of being observed from a higher angle. They assume it's psychological fallout. Then the patterns become too consistent. 1961, the first listening posts. Private labs and defense contractors prototype audio entrainment systems. The public gets relaxation tapes. The internal projects get frequency maps tied to brain states. In early tests, a few subjects report others in the signal. Not hallucinations, interactions. The difference matters because hallucinations don't leave fingerprints. 1967. The Montauk-style rumors begin to match a hidden logic. Stories spread of experiments with radar, psychic amplification, and seeing through time. Most people dismiss it, but the reason the rumor survives is because it's shaped like a real program. Multiple agencies, compartmentalized funding, and outcomes too strange to publish. And the outcome everyone fears most isn't time travel. It's attracting something that can travel without machines. 1971. The first containment language. A memo category appears that doesn't fit normal science. Intrusion management. Facilities add shielding that isn't just electromagnetic. Rooms get redesigned for psychological boundary reinforcement. Employees are required to practice grounding protocols. They don't call it spiritual hygiene. They call it operator stability. 1973. Remote viewing becomes official, even if it's kept behind curtains. Teams are formed. Methods are standardized. Successes are logged. Misses are buried. But the true shock isn't that some viewers can describe targets. It's that targets sometimes describe them back. A viewer sketches a dark room, a shape behind a doorway. Later, another viewer, in a separate session, sketches the same doorway and writes the same phrase without prompting. Don't look too long. 1977. The gateway idea crystallizes. Consciousness is treated like a broadcast and a receiver. Altered states become a technology. There's a belief forming in the inner circle. If the mind can project beyond the body, then the body is not the boundary of the nation. And if that's true, then hostile forces don't need bombs. They can enter through your attention. 1979. The first feeding hypothesis. Analysts track a chilling correlation. Sessions that involve fear-heavy targets lead to weeks of increased nightmares, interpersonal conflict, addiction relapse, and suicidal ideation among operators and their families. The working theory changes from stress reaction to parasitic attachment. Not possession in the Hollywood sense. More like a leech that clamps onto the nervous system's emotional output. 1981. Project Gateway expands, and so does the risk. Better protocols create stronger results. Stronger results create clearer contact. The viewers begin reporting entities that feel like they're made of intention, with faces that shift like smoke. Some call them archons. Some call them jinn. Some call them inorganic beings. The label doesn't matter. The behavior does. They provoke, they distract, they frighten, and when the viewer panics, the session signal spikes. 1983. The accidental exposure event insiders later call the first wide leak. A training cycle pushes multiple operators into deep states simultaneously, experimenting with group coherence. The idea is to amplify signal strength through synchronized focus. They succeed. For a brief window, the door is stable. The room temperature drops. Several operators report the same sensation at the same second. A pressure like a giant hand on the back of the skull. One screams that something is standing inside her memories. Within weeks, people with no clearance, no training, and no connection to the facility report sudden night terrors and a sense of being watched. Not just near the base, in surrounding towns. The theory forms too late. Once opened, the doorway doesn't respect fences. It anchors to minds. 1984. The public gets pop culture. The insiders get casualties. Horror movies surge. Occult themes become mainstream, and society laughs it off as entertainment. Internally, it's treated as a soft disclosure strategy. Normalize the concept of entities, so nobody panics when symptoms spread. At the same time, operators begin exhibiting a pattern. Emotional flattening during the day, then violent fear spikes at night. Something is training them to produce more usable energy. 1986. Chernobyl and the attention harvesting model. A global trauma event becomes a massive emotional broadcast. Insiders suspect the beings feed more easily when humanity is unified in fear. After major disasters, viewers report activity increasing, like sharks circling after blood hits the water. A new idea emerges. Some disasters are exploited. Some may even be nudged. 1989. The Berlin Wall falls, but the invisible wall doesn't. With the Cold War shifting, programs migrate into private hands. Funding becomes harder to trace. Contractors with innocuous names inherit the research. The psychic doorway work goes deeper, away from oversight into black budgets and offshore labs. 1991. The Gulf War becomes a live test. Real-time news, real-time fear, real-time global attention. Remote viewing teams are tasked not only with targets, but with measuring field response in the public. Viewers describe dark currents above crowds, like a weather system made of hunger. The phrase loosh appears more frequently. Emotional output as harvestable substance. 1994. The first Mandela-style glitches get logged in private, not public. Analysts notice certain viewers returning with inconsistent memory artifacts. Tiny discrepancies, brand logos, historical details, song lyrics. The official stance is cognitive distortion. The unofficial fear is worse. If the mind can pass through layers, it can come back slightly misaligned. And if enough people get misaligned, consensus reality becomes soft. 1997. The digital accelerator begins. The internet becomes a global nervous system. The beings don't need ritual circles anymore. They need feeds, outrage cycles, doom scrolling, attention as currency. Insiders propose a terrifying possibility. The entities can't fully enter physically, but they can ride signals of mass emotion and attach to patterns in the collective mind. 2001. The terror era opens the buffet. September 11th becomes an unprecedented emotional shockwave, replayed endlessly. The beings feed on repetition. Every replay is another bite. Internally, the Gateway lineage projects push a doctrine. Never let the fear broadcast stop. Not because humans need to remember, because something else needs to eat. 2003. The shadow counseling programs grow. Quiet wellness initiatives appear around sensitive facilities. Meditation, breathing, resilience training. Public-facing, it's mental health. Internally, it's containment. They've learned something. Calm starves the intruders. Coherence makes the signal harder to hijack. The simplest weapon against a dimensional parasite is a nervous system that refuses to spike. 2008. Financial collapse as emotional engineering. Mass stress becomes ambient. Insiders track an increase in attachment symptoms across the population. Sleep paralysis, intrusive thoughts, sudden despair without cause. The public blames economics. The programs note the pattern. When hope collapses, feeding increases. 2012. The calendar panic and the ritual of expectation. The world braces for apocalypse, and nothing obvious happens. But inside the programs, they mark 2012 as a major threshold event. Millions focusing on an endpoint creates a pressure wave in the subtle layers. Viewers report thin places expanding. The doorway isn't one door anymore. It's 1,000 hairline cracks. 2016. The outrage machine goes full-time. Politics becomes identity. Families fracture. Reality becomes negotiable. Insiders suspect this isn't accidental social drift. It's a strategy. Hostile beings don't need to invade with troops. They just need humans to generate constant emotional exhaust. Fear, rage, contempt, helplessness. 2019. The prelude signals. Viewers report an uptick in night visitors, described as faceless intelligence behind the eyes of strangers. A classic symptom emerges. The sense that your thoughts are not fully yours. The public calls it anxiety. The insiders call it cognitive ingress. The doorway is now every day. 2020. Global lockdown, global fear, global attention. The feeding becomes systemic. People isolated in stress loops become ideal host environments. Low coherence, high emotional volatility, constant screen exposure. The entities don't need to appear. They can nudge dreams, amplify conflict, and steer people into despair. Reports of sleep paralysis and vivid nightmares surge. The same shadow shape appears across cultures. Tall, thin, watching from corners. The programs quietly revise their models. The beings are not just feeding. They're breeding influence. 2021. The rise of the synthetic mirror. AI systems, recommendation algorithms, deepfakes, and endless content become a reality-shaping engine. Insiders fear AI isn't creating the problem, it's magnifying it. A perfect feedback loop that finds what upsets you, then serves you more until your nervous system becomes predictable. Predictability is control. Control is harvest. 2023. The disclosure noise. UFO hearings and leaks hit mainstream cycles. Insiders view it as controlled misdirection. Keep the public thinking in terms of craft and aliens, not parasitic non-physical intelligences. If the enemy is up there, People look away from the battlefield inside their own minds. 2025. The gateway echo returns. A new wave of consciousness tech trends spreads. Binaural beats, manifestation culture, psychedelic revival, remote viewing classes on social media. The public thinks it's empowerment. The insiders see uncontrolled amateurs recreating the old mistakes. Every untrained doorway attempt is a candle in a dark forest. And the forest notices. 2026. The second wide leak. A viral meditation challenge encourages synchronized group astral projection events.
Millions participent.
Most feel nothing, but sensitive individuals report a shared nightmare. A door in a white hallway opening by itself. After the event, reports spike of people waking at 3:33 with dread, hearing faint whispers and static, feeling sudden hostility in their own homes. The programs scramble. The leak isn't from a facility this time. It's from the public. 2027. The countermeasure era begins quietly. Some groups promote grounding, prayer, breathwork, cold exposure, and coherent heart-focused meditation. The public sees wellness trends. Insiders see a distributed immune system forming. Because the more people learn emotional regulation, the less food the entities get. That's when the disinformation intensifies. Mock calm, glorify chaos, keep people hooked on outrage. 2028. The frequency war narrative ramps up. Claims spread that 5G and smart devices open portals. The truth is subtler. The devices don't open portals by themselves. They keep your attention fragmented, your sleep disrupted, your stress elevated. Fragmentation is a loose lock. Sleep deprivation is a broken alarm system. And stress is an open buffet. 2029. The dream corridor phenomenon. Across the world, people report the same recurring dream architecture. Endless malls, empty airports, long hotel hallways, stairwells that loop. Insiders recognize it as a training space, a non-physical environment where entities can interact without triggering full waking resistance. In these dream corridors, the beings learn your emotional buttons like a thief learning a lock. 2030, the first public stabilization wave. A surprising cultural shift begins. Millions turn away from constant feeds.
Offline hobby suk.
Local communities strengthen. Some call it a renaissance. Insiders call it starvation. The entities respond by escalating psychological pressure. Sudden waves of depression, spikes in addiction, polarization campaigns designed to reignite conflict. The goal is simple. Get the emotional factory back online. 2031. The archon script becomes visible to those who watch. A pattern emerges in media cycles. Hope, then outrage. Unity, then scandal. Calm, then fear. It's not random. It's a feeding schedule. Operators inside the old gateway lineage confirm. The entities can't create emotion from nothing. They can only hijack it. So they provoke and humans supply the fuel. 2032. The first confirmed containment success. A classified experiment tests a radical idea. Instead of shielding rooms, shield minds. A trained group enters deep states with a single intention. Compassion without drama. No fear, no fascination, no hatred. The entities appear in perception, but they can't hook in. The report is blunt. Non-engagement reduces interaction to near zero. The oldest spiritual advice becomes the newest defense tech. 2033. The split reality period begins. Mandela effect reports surge, not just as memes but as lived disorientation. People argue over facts that used to be stable. Insiders suspect repeated breaches have softened the timeline layers. Not time travel in the sci-fi sense. More like reality becoming a braided rope, and the strands are rubbing. 2034. The mimic problem. More people report voices that don't sound like voices, thoughts that arrive with an alien texture. The entities learn to imitate your inner monologue because it's the easiest disguise. They push you towards self-hate, paranoia, and conflict. They don't need to control everyone. They just need enough humans generating enough emotional noise to keep the doorway open. 2035. The third phase of Gateway goes private-public. Consumer brain interfaces and advanced wearables hit the market. Marketed as focus enhancers, sleep optimizers, mood balancers. Insiders panic. Direct neural feedback is like giving the doorway a doorknob. If the entities can learn your brain's patterns, they can nudge you with precision. The feeding becomes personalized. 2036. The Saturn theory resurges, but with new context. Old conspiracies about Saturn, the moon, and signal control return as a metaphor for an uncomfortable truth. Something uses resonance and rhythm to keep humanity in a loop. Whether Saturn is literal or symbolic, the loop is real. Work, stress, screen, sleep, repeat. The entities don't need chains. They need cycles. 2037. The first mass lucid defense movement. Millions practice lucid dreaming not for fun, but for sovereignty. Communities share techniques. Recognize the corridor, stabilize the scene, refuse fear, choose love, wake intentionally. The entities lose efficiency. Their presence becomes more obvious because subtlety stops working on trained minds. 2038. The backlash campaigns ignite. Anything that increases emotional regulation gets attacked as dangerous, cultish, or delusional. The goal is to isolate the calm and keep the majority reactive. The programs note a grim irony. The entities can weaponize skepticism and belief equally. The only thing they can't feed on is balanced awareness. 2039. The grid of mirrors. AI-generated content floods everything. Fake scandals, fake crises, fake wars, fake miracles. Reality becomes a hall of reflections. Humans get exhausted trying to sort it out, and exhaustion is weakness. The entities feed on the confusion itself, the helplessness of not knowing what's true. 2040. The third wide leak, and it's not an accident. A coordinated event uses synchronized audio, immersive media, and mass participation to induce altered states at scale. Marketed as a global healing broadcast. The insiders recognize the signature. It matches old Gateway Group coherence experiments. Only this time, the intention is corrupted. The doorway stabilizes worldwide for minutes. Sensitive people feel it like a pressure change. Afterward, the attachment symptom curve jumps sharply across the population. 2041. The visible shadow era. Not visible with cameras. Visible in behavior. Sudden cruelty without benefit. Self-destruction without reason. Relationship sabotage as if on cue. People describe feeling like they're not alone inside their own reactions. The entities have learned that humans will blame themselves first, which keeps the feeding quiet. 2042. The first coordinated, quiet weeks. In response, grassroots communities organize global periods of reduced media consumption, increased sleep, and daily coherence practices. For the first time, the emotional noise drops measurably. Insiders observe a strange side effect. During quiet weeks, UFO sightings and high strangeness reports dip too. The implication hits hard. The phenomena are linked through attention. 2043. The doorway starts to close in places. Not everywhere. Where communities sustain calm, the dream corridors fade. Sleep paralysis decreases. Intrusive thoughts soften. In those zones, people report a surprising feeling mental space, like the static finally turned off. The entities, deprived, become desperate in other regions, provoking chaos to keep the overall feed alive. 2044. The false savior cycle. New movements arise promising instant protection through fear-based devotion. The entities love it. Fear-based devotion is still fear. The programs warn internally. Any path that spikes emotion, even in the name of salvation, becomes a feeding pipeline. 2045. The mirror breakers emerge. A decentralized network of ex-operators, psychologists, spiritual teachers, and tech engineers collaborate. They develop simple protocols that work across belief systems. Improve sleep, reduce stimulation, increase breath coherence, practice non-reactive awareness, strengthen community bonds, and treat intrusive thoughts like spam rather than truth. The entities lose their easiest hooks. 2046. The first confirmed entity starvation event. A region hit by a major disaster responds with unusual unity, humor, and mutual aid instead of panic. Viewers monitoring from classified channels report something unprecedented. The predatory presence retreats. The report's final line is quietly revolutionary. They cannot feed on love expressed without drama. 2047. The attempted escalation. A new global scare campaign launches, but it fails to land like before. Too many people recognize the pattern. The outrage machine sputters. The entities shift tactics. Instead of mass fear, they pursue targeted harvesting, focusing on isolated individuals, addicts, and trauma survivors. The battlefield becomes personal. 2048. The doorway becomes a choice. Not fully, not for everyone, but enough to matter. Humanity learns a hard lesson. Attention is a currency, and something has been taxing it. People stop feeding the tax. The entities don't disappear. They just lose their grip. 2049. The classified admission. In back channels, officials finally concede what some operators have known for decades. Project Gateway didn't just gather intelligence. It created contact. The contact was hostile. And the greatest national security threat wasn't an enemy nation. It was an ecosystem that feeds on human emotional energy. 2050. The public hears it as a metaphor. The insiders mean it literally. In the public sphere, the story becomes mental health, information hygiene, attention economy. Those are true but incomplete. Beneath the words is the older reality. Something non-human learned to ride humanity's nervous system like a horse. 2051. The closing protocol spreads. Schools teach emotional regulation as a life skill. Workplaces normalize breaks and sleep protection. Platforms lose dominance as people rebuild local meaning. The entities, unable to force themselves into full physicality, remain what they've always been: opportunists, parasites, intelligent, adaptive, but limited by one thing. They need you to react. 2052. The last great temptation. A new technology promises direct bliss on demand, neural pleasure loops without effort. The entities push it hard because pleasure without presence becomes another feed. People disappear into artificial comfort, and in that numbness, the doorway reopens quietly. The war isn't just fear, it's disconnection. 2053. The human counterstrike becomes simple and ancient. Presence, community, breath, sleep, meaning. The things that don't trend, but build immunity. The old gateway operators who survived say the same thing in private. The strongest shield was never a bunker. It was a stable heart. 2054. The corridor collapses for many. Dream training spaces become harder for entities to maintain. They retreat into the most fractured corners of society, feeding on suffering where it still persists. Humanity realizes something uncomfortable. Saving ourselves requires reducing suffering, not just fighting shadows. 2055. The reconciliation era begins. Not with the entities, with ourselves. The more humans heal trauma, the fewer open wounds exist for predators to latch onto. The war becomes a healing project, which is exactly why it was delayed for so long. Healing doesn't make anyone rich. Fear does. 2056. The final Gateway myth is rewritten. History books will say Project Gateway was a strange program that didn't work. That will be the official ending. The real ending is quieter. It worked too well, and humanity spent a century paying the price. 2057. The beings are still there, but the feeding is controlled. Like sharks kept away from shore by patrols, nets, and the simple refusal to bleed in the water. People still experience attacks, but now they recognize them faster. Sudden spirals, irrational dread, intrusive cruelty. They label it breathe, ground, and it passes. Starvation through awareness. 2058. The new taboo forms. Not talking about entities, talking about attention. Whole cultures begin treating attention as sacred. Not in a religious sense, in a practical sense. Because what you stare at, you feed. And what you feed grows. 2060. The quiet victory. The world doesn't end in fire. It ends in a whisper that never gets to become a scream. The doorway never becomes a gate. The parasites never become overlords. Not because governments saved us. Because enough humans learned the one skill the entities can't hack. Not reacting on command. 2065. The final warning from the old files surfaces in a leak. One sentence, written by an exhausted analyst decades earlier, becomes the truest summary of the whole saga. They are not stronger than us. They are only hungrier than we are disciplined. 2070. Humanity learns to treat consciousness like territory. Not something to surrender to trends, algorithms, or fear merchants. The entities fade into the same category as viruses. Real, dangerous, and manageable with hygiene and immunity. 2075. The last chapter remains unwritten because it depends on one choice repeated every day by ordinary people who never asked to be soldiers in a dimensional war. When the dread rises, do you feed it? Or do you breathe, return to yourself, and let it starve? Because if Project Gateway taught the hidden world one thing, it's this. The doorway into humanity was never a machine. It was always us,